Unitarian Universalists are united by common values of compassion, community, freedom, justice, and stewardship. Today, we invite you to explore prophecy for 2015. We light the chalice this morning as a symbol of our connection to each other. As the Reverend Jonipher lights the chalice, we join our voices together. We light this chalice with the embers of compassion. We light this chalice with the torch of justice. We light this chalice with the radiance of joy.
All right. Well, children of all ages, come on down. And as we're doing prophecy, I couldn't help but open with a quote. I miss my kid Maggie, who's not with us right now. She's visiting her dad in Oregon. And so in her honor, I'm going to read you a Rick Riordan quote. You know, the lightning thief, Percy Jackson. Anybody? One. Okay, my kid and one kid in the audience. Two. Awesome. And Rick Riordan wrote, "Knowing too much of your future is never a good thing." All right, so today, quick announcement, stone soup next week. Don't forget your veggies and meats and whatever else. Okay, so today we're going to read Frederick. All along the meadow where the cows grazed and the horses ran, there was an old stone wall. In that wall, not far from the barn and the granary, a chatty family of field mice had their home. But the farmers had moved away, the barn was abandoned, and the granary stood empty. And since winter was not far off, the little mice began to gather corn and nuts and wheat and straw. They all worked day and night, all except Frederick. He's that little one who looks sleepy. "Frederick, why don't you work?" they asked. "I do work," said Frederick. "I gather sun rays for the cold, dark winter days." They're all carrying corn. And when they saw Frederick sitting there, staring at the meadow, they said, "And now, Frederick?" "I gather colors," answered Frederick simply, "for winter is gray." And once Frederick seemed half asleep. "Are you dreaming, Frederick?" they asked reproachfully. But Frederick said, "Oh no, I am gathering words, for the winter days are long and many, and will run out of things to say." The winter days came, and when the first snow fell, the 5 little field mice took to their hideout in the stones. In the beginning, there was lots to eat, and the mice told stories of foolish foxes and silly cats. They were a happy family. But little by little, they had nibbled up most of their nuts and berries. The straw was gone, and the corn was only a memory. It was cold in the wall, and no one felt like chatting. Then they remembered what Frederick had said about the sun rays and colors and words. "What about your supplies, Frederick?" "Close your eyes," said Frederick, as he climbed on a big stone. "Now I send you the rays of the sun. Do you feel their golden glow?" And as Frederick spoke of the sun, the 4 little mice began to feel warmer. Was it Frederick's voice? Was it magic? "And now, how about the colors, Frederick?" they asked anxiously. "Close your eyes again," Frederick said. And when he told them of the blue periwinkles, the red poppies in the yellow wheat, and the green leaves of the berry bush, they saw the colors as clearly as if they had been painted in their minds. "And the words, Frederick?" Frederick cleared his throat, waited a moment, and said, as if from a stage he said, "Who scatters snowflakes? Who melts the ice? Who spoils the weather? Who makes it nice? Who grows the four-leaf clovers in June? Who dims the daylight? Who lights the moon? 4 little field mice who live in the sky. 4 little field mice like you and I. One is the spring mouse who turns on the showers. Then comes the summer, who paints in the flowers. The fall mouse is next with walnuts and wheat. The winter is last with little cold feet. Aren't we lucky the seasons are 4? Think of a year with 1 less or 1 more. When Frederick had finished, they all applauded. But Frederick, they said, you are a poet. And Frederick said, I know it. So that was Frederick's little prophecy for that year. All right, with that, let's sing our children upstairs. Make a bridge, please. Thank you so much.
Go now in peace. May the Spirit of love surround you everywhere, everywhere you may go. Go now in peace. Go now in peace. May the Spirit of love surround you everywhere, everywhere you may go.
This is the opening paragraph, the closing paragraph of Donna Tartt's amazing novel, The Goldfinch. Don't worry if you haven't read it yet. This is not a spoiler. Whatever teaches us to talk to ourselves is important. Whatever teaches us to sing ourselves out of despair. Life, whatever else it is short. Fate is cruel, but maybe not random. Nature, meaning death, always wins, but that doesn't mean we have to bow and grovel to it. Maybe if we're not always so glad to be here, it's our task to immerse ourselves anyway, wade straight through it, right through the cesspool, while keeping eyes and hearts open. And in the midst of our dying, as we rise from the organic and sink back ignominiously into the organic, it is a glory and a privilege to love what death doesn't touch. For disaster and oblivion have followed this painting down through time, so too has love. Insofar as it is immortal, and it is, I have a small, bright, immutable part of that immortality. It exists and it keeps on existing, and I add my own love to the history of people who have loved beautiful things and looked out for them and pulled them from the fire and sought them when they were lost and tried to preserve them and save them while passing them along literally from hand to hand, singing out brilliantly from the wreck of time to the next generation of lovers and the next.
Please join me for this responsive reading. Always, it is easier to pay homage to prophets than to heed the direction of their vision.
It is easier blindly to venerate the saints than to learn the human quality of their sainthood.
It is easier to glorify the heroes of the race than
To give weight to their examples.
to worship the wise is much easier than to profit by their wisdom.
Great leaders are honored not by adulation, but by sharing their insights and values.
Grandchildren of those who stoned the prophet sometimes gather up the stones to build the prophet's monument. Always, it is easier to pay homage to prophets than to heed the direction of their vision. Today, we're going to be talking about prophets and prophecy. And what a great imagery Richard had of that crystal ball. And I must say, I must begin this sermon with an apology to those of you who perhaps read an abstract of what today's sermon was going to be about. Because, contrary to what the abstract says, I'm not going to be doing any predicting. So I know you're all very disappointed, and you're all ready to call me a false prophet and all that, aren't you? But in my defense, today I am going to redefine what it means to be a prophet. So rather than a prophet taking a look at, say, the Honolulu Star Advertiser article that came out last week, for example, on astrology, as predicting what this year is going to be about, I'm going to be talking to you and predicting what today and this moment is going to be about. Because isn't that more fun than living either in the past or in some far-off future that isn't here yet? And I know that's so contrary, and I might get an amen from Rick here, to what churches do sometimes, even liberal congregations like ours, right? I mean, I'm not going to talk stink about other churches, but there are those churches that one may know of that may think back to their heyday back in the 1950s and 60s, for example, when they refused to sign the McCarthy statement claiming that they're not communists, right? And that somehow that gets encapsulated and set in stone as the only liberal social justice thing that that church has ever done, which, in order to remain a progressive spiritual tradition, we know that it can't possibly be the case, because that is a when-we kind of church. Back when we did this a certain way, back when we engaged, and back when we marched with so-and-so, quite honestly, I wasn't even alive yet back then. So, not to disrespect anybody or disrespect the efforts and disrespect the shoulders that we stand on, but I am more concerned about what we do today. Amen. So rather than looking to the stars and looking for our horoscopes, I'd rather us look down here into our planet now. What is going on now? And how can we, as Unitarian Universalists, meet the needs of our world now? Because if we don't address it now, there ain't going to be a tomorrow, folks. I got news for you. So this is what liberal religious prophecy looks like. All right? Are you with me so far?
Yep.
All right, good. I'm glad I got one preacher saying amen. The rest of you are just, oh boy. So in order to go on, I must also do another disclaimer. This is my resource list, my bibliography. How many of you have heard of the UUA over the past 4 or 5 years or so coming out with what's called a common read? It's a book that our denomination encourages all of us to start reading so that we'd be on the same page about the contemporary issues that are facing our world today. And so for 2014 and 2015, this book is called Reclaiming Prophetic Witness, Liberal Religion in the Public Square. And it's written by famous UU theologian Paul Reiser. He's probably one of my all-time favorite theologians. And I can't even begin to tell you how relieved I was to know that this book was published. Because when we came up with the theme last year, I didn't know about this book. But when I read it, I thought, oh my gosh, I don't even need to come up with a Jonipher original sermon. I could just plagiarize. But needless to say, it's so difficult because it's a very long book and there's so many juicy quotes in there that I'm really just giving you the tip of the iceberg. So look at this sermon more like a Cliff's Notes. So in order for you to pass the class, you really have to read the book. And besides, our wonderful co-chair of our worship team, Elizabeth Flannery, came up with another bright idea. She said, why don't we do a book group and put together a small group ministry to discuss this UU Common Read book? So, hopefully, after the sermon today, you all will check it out or buy it on your Kindle and or download it, I should say, and get together with Elizabeth to form this class. All right, so here we go. According to Paul Reiser, can you take a wild guess as to how many % of Americans can actually be considered religious liberals?
Yes, I can.
because you attended the 9:15 service. That is cheating. So anyone else who wasn't at the earlier service and who hasn't read the book can take a wild guess. How many percent of the population do you think are religious liberals? 2%. Can I get a higher percentage? 35, too high. How many did you say, Ryan? 15? That's still too low. All right, so let's look at how we come up with the math here. So Razor's research shows that, well, we all know how many UUs there are. I would hope that we all would consider ourselves religious liberals, right? So that's 165,000. 165,000 divided by 30 million or so in this country. What is that? 0.00001% of the population, right? All right. 300 million. Wait, what do you mean? Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, you're right. Population of the U.S. Right. Thank you, man. Now, can you tell me what the math comes out to? All right, well, fine. All right, you get where I'm going with this. It's a tiny percentage, right? So how many? Okay, we'll include the Jews because we know that there's a bunch of liberal Jews out there too, right? Except for the ones who aren't liberal. But even the conservative are liberal. I know that's kind of confusing, but we won't count the Orthodox or the Chabad, right? Okay, so 2.2% total Jews. So we'll include Reform and conservative, and we'll say 2%. So that brings us to a total of what someone was saying earlier, 2.00000 whatever percentage, right? If you include the UUs and the Jews. How about those Buddhists? Some of them are pretty darn liberal, right? We could include them too. But how many percent of the population are there? Very tiny too. So if we were to just partner up with these people, can you see where I'm going with the math here? But there's a huge chunk called progressive Christians. Untapped territory, folks. I tell you, and that closet progressive pope. Ooh. Yeah. What if we were to tap into some of that juice, yeah? Well, according to Paul Razor, if you counted all of them, that brings it up to 25%. 1 out of every 4 could be considered a liberal religious person in this country. And yet, you may be saying to me, why is it that every time you turn on the news and every time you see these protests out there, they're from these right-wing, evangelical, fundamentalist Christians, right? Why is it that they seem to have the bully pulpit, and why is it that they have a megaphone? And so here's what Paul Razor had to say about why religious liberals have been so ineffective. The first reason, you want to know what it is? Yeah. Is our refusal to talk about our faith publicly. Like I said, Pope Francis puts us to shame. Here's what he says. Paul Razor says, the liberal refusal to draw a sharp line between religion and culture can make it difficult to maintain the necessary theological clarity needed to ground an effective prophetic voice. Religious identity may become so thin that liberal religion becomes indistinguishable from liberal politics, and liberal spirituality dissolves into pop psychology, and liberalism's prophetic edge becomes blunted.
Amen.
Basically, what he's trying to say is our message becomes so diluted, we sound just like any other group there is out there. Why are we different from certain political parties? Why are we different from the Sierra Club? What makes us distinct as liberal religious people? For more of that, stay tuned, because that's the next part of the sermon. And the second, I do want to hammer this point in, though, because I do think it's a rather important one. And the one reason that I keep, or the one example that I keep going back to is marriage equality. And Rick could attest to this, because we were doing a lot of organizing work with California Faith for Equality all up and down throughout the state. And us religious folks, we think that if only we could rationalize our position with the general public, surely they would get it. If we could only say, back during the 1990s, remember here, we said protect the Constitution. That would make people want to vote for marriage equality, wouldn't it? Don't we want to protect our lovely Constitution? And the religious leaders, that's the message they've been giving too. But what do we know about the Constitution? I'm not a constitutional expert. What I do know is the language that I've been taught about the inherent worth and dignity of every individual. What I do know is justice, equity, and compassion in human relations. That is the basis and the foundation for my moral and ethical beliefs. And if I don't speak that out in public, I'm just going to sound just like any other Joe Schmo there is out there. Our opponents know their talking points. Our opponents know where they're coming from. Our opponents have books, and they could quote you to death and clobber you with their books all day long. But do our convictions just as firm? And can we be able to articulate our faith just as well? And guess what we found out last year during the special session? When we handed clergy people a microphone, and when we put together a press conference that 40 people attended, including many of you in this congregation, guess what took place on the steps of the Capitol? The conversation shifted. Suddenly, those people who were shouting at us had a curious look on their face. What are you doing singing our songs? What are you doing using words like faith and grace and hope and love? What are you doing? Those are our language. But no. They're our language too. You don't have a monopoly on it. Thank you very much. Right? All right. Well, okay. So the other example I have about how we diluted the message is, have any of you flown inter-island on Hawaiian Airlines before? Yeah, a few of you. Ever notice that juice that they pass out? Ever really notice it? It's not really POG, you know. If you read the label very carefully, it's almost 0% real fruit juice. It's mostly water and sugar. So Chris and I, we actually just refuse it, because he said, if I want to have water, I'll just have water. If I want to have sugar, I'll just eat a spoonful of sugar. Makes the, how does that Mary Poppins song go? Makes the medicine go. Yeah. Anyway, so we call it placebo juice. That's what it is, right? It's not even supposed to do anything for you. So similarly, when we speak out there without saying anything, we might as well be serving placebo juice. And this is the challenge to anybody who ever goes to General Assembly one of these days and tries to pass one of our resolutions. If you're going to talk about immigration justice, don't just give me placebo juice. Don't just use the whereases that are used by any other immigrant group out there. Give me what is stated in our principle that is so convicting for you. Give me something faithy I could grab onto that would make meaning and sense in my life of why I want to pass this resolution and why this resolution has teeth. That's what I want to see. Can I get an amen to that?
Amen.
Yeah? All right. So I'm only on point one. I'm running out of time here. All right. So point two of why liberals aren't effective is that Paul Razor says, if you look around you on who's involved in most of these liberal causes, they're mostly people who come from privilege. Right? And so how can people of privilege speak to the condition of those who are poor and oppressed in our country? And without going into too much detail, the solution that Paul comes up with is what I call the Popeye perspective, the Popeye position. I am what I am, and I am what I am. That's all that I am, because I am what I am. Right? The Popeye position. That we could only be who we are, we could only stand in the position that we could stand in We can't change that. None of us can change who we were born to and what conditions we were born to. But rather than sink into despair and say, I'll be helpless and I'll just retreat into my liberal bubble and hang out with all my friends, can we see that as an opportunity and a perspective to say, I know I'm here, but I could still stand on the side of love with you. That I could still be your ally. I could still be there for you and speak from where I'm standing. Is that at all possible? Quite a challenge. And the third one is the argument that somehow, if we speak out publicly with our prophetic witness, we would be violating the separation of church and state. And I know that is a value that is near and dear to all our hearts. We all want to protect this high wall of separation between church and state so that there wouldn't be a theocracy in our country, right? So that there wouldn't be just one religion that is practiced in America. Because how boring is it if that were the case? You know what I mean? But, however, we as religious liberals can speak out about social justice issues until the cows come home. Did you know that? We can speak out about it as much as we want to if we're not forcing the government to establish just one religion, and if we're not supporting certain political candidates in the process. All right? Again, I could go on and on about that. But I'm sure all of you at this point are begging to join the ranks of a progressive prophet who is present-oriented. Are you not? Yes. All right, so are you ready? Here's the 3 job descriptions I have for you. Number 1, you have to be a brave soul willing to stand or sit in between participation and independence. That's a tough line to straddle, isn't it? Participation and independence. You have to be willing to be both an insider and an outsider, both in society and within religious institutions. Not an easy thing to do. Live in that inter kind of world and be a bridge builder. So that's the first one. The second one, and I mentioned this before, you have to be able, folks, to clearly articulate your faith. Come out of the closet, please. Closets are for clothes. Isn't that how the saying goes? And here's what Paul Razor had to say to that. Oh, wait, before I get into that, by the way. At the last convening of church, there was some confusion as to what universalism actually meant. And most people actually said, well, we don't know what universal salvation means anymore. So what would a universalist theology say about prophetic witness? Put simply, universalism's core theological insight was that all humanity, indeed all of creation, is ultimately united in a common destiny. Universalism insisted that individual merit had no bearing on salvation. In other words, one person's salvation is no more important than anyone else's. Did we get that? We are all in this together. We're not just saving all human beings from helplessness and hopelessness. We're also saving the polar bears from the melting ice caps. We're also saving the whales. We're also saving every single creature until there's no one else left to save. Hallelujah. All right? So can I hear for salvation from you all? All right. Great. Finally, you're waking up. And lastly, I think we need to be razor sharp with our focus and be so disciplined about how we follow our vision. I know, that's hard. That's hard. It's extremely difficult because there's so many things that we could be chasing as a congregation, so many good works that we need to be doing out in our world. But for us to be effective, we need to be focused. And this is why we're coming up with a strategic plan, right? And you all are still welcome to participate in that after the service. And all I have to say, because I'm going to be giving you my own vision for this congregation in just a couple minutes here. All right, I'll give it now. since I'm out of a couple of minutes. So I'll give it now. I know you're looking back at the clock, Catherine. So here's my vision for this congregation. It's pretty simple, actually. Let's get back to our foundation. Let's get back to the basic principle on which this church was founded. Let's get back to our core competencies. What do we know how to do best as Unitarian Universalists? What is it in our history and our tradition that compels us to do the work that we need to do?
Coffee?
And other than coffee, that is pretty important. So let's think about that. And let's think about Hawaii specifically and what our world is in need of right now. Can we get an agreement that perhaps, just for now, we could focus on something like economic justice, for example, as the inequity and the rise of the gap between the rich and the poor grows wider and wider? Can we do something about it as a congregation? Can we stand with the 99%? That wasn't a rhetorical question, by the way.
You have to tell us.
I don't have time to tell you right now.
Next week.
So tune in next week and the week after, and maybe even the whole year, because we'll be talking about this until the cows come home. We'll be talking about this until what? Everyone is saved, right? All 100% of us, and not just the 1%. So come back. Y'all come back, right? Promise you'll come back? All right, good, good. And here's the thing. I hear Charlotte back there. You'll love this one. If our vision divulges, if we have a double vision in this congregation, if my vision is different from your vision, my only advice is to go see an optometrist. And I bet you anything, they'll prescribe a progressive lens. Thank you very much, folks. All right, I'm really going to end here. So I'm not going to end until I get an amen from everybody on this one. Who is ready to join me to become a progressive prophet living in the present? Amen. Can you say amen to that? All right, good. Thanks. Now I can sit down.